There's still some people dropping in, but we start anyway. Welcome to our special event by Kokubunken and Goethe University on the future possibilities of digital humanities and Japanese studies. This is the first part, which will go from 10:15 to 11:45, and then there will be a second part at 12:30 till 2 o'clock. The first part will be conducted in English, and the second part in Japanese. And there will also be a roundtable later, and only a small Q&A session today on the first part. My name is Bastian Vogtmann. I'm from research fellow from Goethe University, and this is our program for today. Our first speaker is going to be Koray Birnheide. Is also from Frankfurt University, and Koray finished his bachelor in Frankfurt and is currently enrolled in our MA program. And he's programming software called DemiScript that we've been using for a couple of years now. And he will present on one of his own projects that he did with the help of DemiScript. Second, Leo Born from Heidelberg is going to present his work on the Japanese biographical database. Leo just finished his MA at Heidelberg and in computational linguistics, and most recently he's working on the JVDB, but also on the digital literary map together with Judith Arokai from Heidelberg, and the JVDB, of course, with Bettina Gramlich-Oker from Sophia University. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Next will be Michael Kinski, professor for the history of culture and history of thought in Japan, also from Goethe University in Frankfurt, and he's talking about his research on Kaiho Seiryō and some of the hiccups he encountered while doing his research using some tools from the field of digital humanities. Afterwards, we'll hear Uesaka Ayaka, who finished her PhD at Doshisha University. She's now researching at Osaka University. She did her PhD on Ihara Saikaku. And I think we will hear from some of her results from that research today. Most recently, she was conducting research on the classification of Buddha statues. And our last speaker will be Hashimoto Yuta. He received his PhD from Kyoto University. He's now a researcher at Reikihaku in Sakura. And I think he's most famous for his work on Minade Honkoku, crowdsourcing approach towards the work with historical sources. And most recently, he was trying to fuse crowdsourcing and AI-aided OCR, which means optical character recognition of historical texts. And afterwards, we're going to have a short Q&A. So, Koray, would you mind starting?
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction, and welcome to my fellow speakers and attendees. My name is Koray Birnheide, as Bastian Vogtmann already introduced. and I'll be presenting the Shin Toto Saijiki, which is a digitally enhanced map project I created between late 2020 and early 2021. The Shin Toto Saijiki shows the annual shrine and temple and festival visits of one Saito Geshin on a contemporary, or for him contemporary, Edo map, the Bunken Edo Ezo, which you can see on my screen share in just a moment. There you go. I hope I'm sharing the right window. This is the digital Bunken Edo Ezo, which I have digitally augmented using Demiscript software. That is a web-based application I've been creating since 2017 that is intended to allow for the direct transcription and annotation, well, initially of Japanese woodblock prints, but it is a software very versatile and adaptable to all sorts of needs. Its current state looks something like this. This is the editor interface. Here you have a viewer window, which can currently display two types of image documents. It has support for Silverlight deep zoom images and for IIIF manifests. IIIF is the International Image Interoperability Framework. It is a web technology that makes up one of the current academic standards and is especially used in the curation of digital material in museums and libraries. Now, with this software, unlike with an indirect transcription, you can freely view and zoom into your original document and then create the transcription directly onto the document. This is especially interesting for annotating maps and images, but also Japanese woodblock prints, which are often heavy in illustrations and boast unique formatting, elements that are lost in an indirect transcription. And yes, you can basically just type in new lines here, add them to the document, and then move them around freely and manipulate them freely, edit size, line height, text color, even rotate and skew them if the original document has not been scanned in a as straight fashion as possible, all to recreate the original reading experience, but with modern type, making the text more accessible to a wider audience of readers. And once the text has been transcribed, it is available in plain text format. It can be copied and used in other projects or papers. And yes, there's already multi-page support, so you can transcribe entire documents, and you can even create special objects that are SVG based, mark out areas on the document, for example, and comment these to add additional information. Now, for my project, I have annotated the Bunken Edo Izu from the from the Japanese Historical Maps collection from the David Ramsey website. For this, I'm using their IIIF manifest, so I'm not actually hosting the map myself, but reading out the metadata from that manifest to render the map in my viewer. As you can see, there's a large number of locations that I've mapped out here using the polygon function and tagging them using iText elements. And using the commentary function, I've added various additional information to the points, such as articles using the integrated article system and tour points, which I will explain in a moment. But before we get to the map project itself, let's say a few words about the subject of my studies, Saito-ge Shin. For this, I will read a brief translation of this memorial marker that was placed in Kanda in Tokyo, at the place where his mansion used to stand. So I'm reading. Saito-ge Shin was born in this town, Kanda Tsukasamachi Nichome, during the Bunka era in 1804. For generations, the Saito family passed down the title of a village head, ruling the 6 Kanda neighborhoods of Kijicho, Mikawacho, Nichome and its back alleys, Mikawacho, Yonchome and its back alleys, and Shikencho. At the age of 15, he became the 9th heir and took on the name Ichizaemon, his former name being Yukishige. In addition to completing the Edo Meisho-zue, handed down by his grandfather Yukio and his father Yukitaka, he left behind the Toto Saijiki, the Bukon Nenpyo, and countless other books that are essential works in the study of Edo citizenry even today. He was a cultured representative of Edo and the pride of Kanda. He slipped into eternal slumber on the 6th of March, 1878, Meiji 11, at the age of 75. For generations, the Saito family have been entombed at the Hozenji in Higashi Ueno. Now, as you can see, there are a couple of reasons why Saito-ge Shin is an interesting research subject when it comes to Edo culture. He himself created or continuing the work of his grandfather and father, the Edo Meisho-zue, a large volume on the famous places around Edo, and the Toto Saijiki, which has been vital in the creation of this project. In the Toto Saijiki, the annual festivals of the Eastern capital, Saito-ge Shin outlines the various festivals, feast days, religious holidays, and other yearly events, many of which he attended. And the goal of this project was to use the data presented in, among other places, that Toto Saijiki, to create a more spatial understanding of where Saito-ge Shin lived in Edo and where the places he visited are. Now, if I turn on the annotation, you can see that there are quite a few locations that I've mapped out on the Bunken Edo Izu. Not all of these are locations that were visited by Saito-ge Shin on a yearly basis. Some of them I picked out as part of my efforts to locate the places I was actually looking for. While this is quite a beautiful and well-typed map, it's still not easy finding many of the locations that I'm looking for, or that I was looking for several reasons. One, the typeface is not technically the modern Mincho Tai that we work with. And for another, the map is not well, it's not quite geographically accurate. It's rather skewed. There's the distances between various places and the sizes of various places would not match up with a modern map. So in order to locate places, I had to utilize various methods. Among them, I used the modern locations of the various places I was looking for, and then tried to triangulate them on this Bunken Edo Ezu using reference markers such as Edo Castle and the Sensoji, which were rather easy to locate due to their prominence on the map, and then try to work out the rough location of other places on the map, and well, basically rummage around in these smaller areas to find the places I'm looking for. One of the more interesting places to locate was Saito Geshin's residence in Kanda Nichome, which is not actually called Kanda Nichome on this map, because the neighborhoods were ravaged during an earthquake and rebuilt after the creation of this map. So, how do you use this digitally augmented map? Well, for one, you can of course just drag it around with your mouse. You're scrolling or clicking to zoom in and view the various places here. But to better augment the parts of the map that were important to me, namely the various stations he visited, I created a guided tour feature, which basically takes you chronologically from station to station, showing which places he visited over the course of the year. I separated those into the 12 months. And once you open one of those places, an article will pop up, giving some context and also listing the instances in which Saito Geshin visited this location. As you can see, there were several instances in which he visited the Sensoji. For example, the day after New Year's, Geshin went to worship the Kannon at Asakusa. Such a pilgrimage was undertaken almost every year. There are also additional woodblock prints from the Tokyo National Diet Library implemented into these articles to further enhance the viewer experience. My underlying idea for the project was that viewers can get a much more visual understanding of the data that is already available. So as we move on, went to the Matsuchiyama Shoten, then to the Atagoyama Jinja, then to the Kameido Tenmangu and the Toranomon Kompira, which incidentally actually visited every month of the year. And then he went to the Sanja Gongen and the Kameido Tenmangu, and again the Matsuchiyama Shoten. Then the Akiba Jinja, Kuramae Enmado, and the Yanagishima Myokendo. Man. I was wondering how many more were left in the first month. So yes, this is the project I created using DemiScript. There's more than just a map. I have lots of additional information here about Saito Geshin, the lunisolar calendar used in the dates used to represent his yearly travels, about DemiScript itself and my methods of localization. And I'll share the link to the project so you can look it up yourself in the Zoom chat. There we go. It is currently hosted on the European EDO network. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you enjoy the following presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Koi. This project has come a long way since we started on Demiscript in 2017. And there have been some questions in the chat that Michael has already answered, and we'll have the Q&A at the end of the session, so we can talk a bit more then. And the next will be Leo.
Yes, thank you very much. I will just start sharing my screen first. I hope this does it now. So thank you again, Bastian, for the very kind introduction. My name is Leo Born. I'm currently affiliated with the Institute for Japanese Studies at Heidelberg University, although today's presentation is on behalf of Bettina Gramlich-Oka and the JBDB project. The title is Connected Components of and in the JBDB, and I will hope it will become clear what that means by the end of my presentation. So the outline today would be to just shortly recap what the JBDB is about, what you can do with it, and its current state, so what our team members are currently working on. And today's main focus will be on two distinct new components, which I call simply project integrations and the public API. And lastly, I would give a short outlook on what we can and will or should maybe do in the future with that. So first off, the recap, what is the JBDB? So JBDB stands for Japan Biographical Database. It's modeled after the very famous China Biographical Database, the CBDB, and the aim is to build an exhaustive database of historical people related to Japan. So initially that was more strictly defined as Japanese people, but more and more as we've been working on the project for the past, I guess now it's 9 years, starting in 2012. It also encompasses non-Japanese people who have some relation to Japan. So either foreigners who came to Japan, or if historical Japanese people went overseas and had contact with foreigners outside of Japan, those people would still be considered part of the JBDB, as they play an important role in manifesting networks of Japan-related people. A separate aim, apart from just the building of the database, was to allow users, in our specific case, these can be other scholars, students, or just the interested general public, to allow them to explore the data in more structured and some more unstructured ways. So currently that breaks down to 3 distinct possibilities of internet-connected exploration of the data. The first is using complex search queries, which I will show you in just a second. The second one, which has been the main focus of previous presentations on the JBDB, are interactive network visualizations. I will show just 2 examples of that today, not in an exactive way due to time constraints, however. And the third one involves basic GIS visualizations. So it is by far not as advanced as what we have seen in the previous talk by Koray. Our GIS simply involves a modern map of the world, which is then overlaid with the underlying data in our database. Speaking of which, our data mainly consists of 2 broad categories. persons and events. As of today, we have roughly 12,000 entries on people in the JBDB and 10,000 event entries. That is still far way off from the hundreds of thousands of people in the CBDB. But yeah, progress is still progress. I guess I think the last time we presented this, we were at about 7,000 person entries. And those are structured in a way that we have our main biographical information related to a person as a separate entry, and then multiple ways of connecting people to each other. So one is, as is here on the slide, events between people. So if people meet or correspond in some way, if they exchange letters or goods, for example, and others are kinship and non-kinship relations. So familial and social relations between people. All of these are our backbone of the database, connecting all people to each other, which then enables us to both query people by some shared attributes, as well as visualize their networks. Currently, our team members are working on adding new events. They pertain to Rai Shunsu, which was the starting person of the JBDB, so to speak. For him, we have two digitized Nikki, actually one by himself and one by his wife, Shizu. And over the past couple of years, the team members kind of just manually input the events that were mentioned in the Nikki into the database, which was, of course, a very slow and tedious process, which we were able to now speed up a little bit. However, we cannot do that automatically due to basically NLP limitations on how to identify and extract events in the Nikki text. So our current way of doing that is somewhat semi-automatic. The fully automatic process was to basically assign a date to each entry in the Nikki, and now present that in the interface for our team members to go through each line. But at the same time, while presenting each line, we already query all events that are for that date already in the database. So team members have kind of a somewhat easier task of just first checking whether the event mentioned in that entry is already there or not, and only if the entry contains a new event, a team member has to manually add that event. So from the last figures I saw yesterday, we are about well, 10% through the Nikkis, although we have to mention that this feature was only enabled fairly recently. So we hope to have fairly fast progress on that within the next year or so, which would really be a speedy progress compared to the adding of events in the past few years. As I mentioned, one component now concerns the search capabilities. We've introduced a visual query builder for the JBDB, of which I just show you a very basic example. You have to note that the queries can be as complex as you want them to be. For illustration purposes, I just concentrated on one fairly easy example here, which combines one condition, namely that the name written in kanji, kanji must contain the character for Rai, regardless of how it's actually read. And that is combined with an optional statement. So either that person then has to have gender male, or that person has to have occupation physician, which reads as, okay, give me all persons named Rai who are either male or are physicians. The result then would look something like this. We have small font, 148 such entries. But the use cases actually are, as I said, unlimited in the sense that you can make those queries as complex as you want. And there are, of course, other attributes you can consider apart from just name, gender, and occupation. Just so much for the current state of affairs. One of the main points I'd like to introduce to you today concerns project integrations. As some context, currently beforehand, we only had links to other resources. Namely, those were the 4 resources mentioned here, the Nigel Shin-Nihon Kotenseki Sogo database, then the ARC Bunkajin Geinojin Jinbutsume database, Wikipedia, and Japan Search. Those links are indicated by the 4 logos of each respective institution below the avatar or image of each person entry. But that was fairly static. So it was just simply a way for users coming to our database to see whether or not that person is mentioned in one of those other resources as well or not. What is new, however, is now the capability to associate people within the JBDB to different and separate projects. So we have the default project, JBDB, to which every person within the JBDB, of course, belongs. Apart from that, we have, however, one pilot project, which was done in cooperation with Frankfurt University under Bastian as the principal investigator, where during the last semester, the summer semester, we prepared a data set consisting of Japanese students in Germany between 1868 and 1914 for the import into the JBDB. That in turn was based on the data set by Rudolf Hartmann, japanische Studenten an deutschen Universitäten und Hochschulen 1868 bis 1914, which was granted access to by the Staatsbibliothek Berlin. Within the web application of the JBDB, now this looks something like this. So we have added another main tab in the database view, which is simply called projects. And as you can see, there are currently the 2 projects I have mentioned before. And where this becomes interesting now and in the future is in dissecting exactly what overlap there might be between projects. So not just to see at, okay, what kind of projects are there and what people and events constitute these projects, but more interestingly, what the intersections between projects might be. So one way to do that is to go back to the search functionality, and you can maybe see it in the background here. I didn't separate the screenshots here. So this is basically a search query that only queries people who are associated with both the JBDB project and the new Hartmann project. As we can see, there are 10 such entries or 10 such people who show up in both our projects. And we can even visualize them now to see, are there any events of those 10 people of any people from the new Hartmann dataset with any other people of the JBDB that we had before. And this looks something like this, which is a very small network. But it has to be noted, however, that the Hartmann dataset only consisted of the people entries, not of any event entries. So having that as context is quite interesting to see that actually just one person, or not just one person, but one person shows up who has had events added within the JBDB distinct from the new Hartmann project. As we can see, the person who now matches both criteria, which is who is in both JBDB and Hartmann project, is Takashima Tomonosuke. And the other 3 people here are people from the JBDB project, who have connections to that person through some other events we already added beforehand. When I investigated the data, it turned out that some of our team members are working on the history of the Sofia University and foreigners coming to Sofia University. And it turns out that in the context of those people, Takashima Tomonosuke was already mentioned, and events to him and connections to him were added. Now, I will leave the project integrations at that point. I will come back to that later on and focus on the second part of the current presentation, which concerns the public API. This is more, yeah. Sure.
I think we already reached the 50 minutes mark.
Okay, so then I will skip this part and just briefly mention the.
Maybe you can show one or two slides later in the Q&A, but I think we have to move on. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Hear about the JVDB for hours, but I think we have to move on in the lineup.
Yeah, no problem. As I mentioned before, during testing, I can't quit the presentation right now, so I will leave that up to you to do that. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry it took so long. I was not aware of the time limit, but thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you a lot. And next will be Michael.
Yep. As Bastian mentioned in the beginning, I will be sharing my hiccups with you, and I hope you don't mind that there will be too much hiccuping about Kaiho Seiryō on the one hand, the cause of my hiccups, and a belief in the magical powers of computerized analysis, and perhaps very unfounded belief in the idea that computers will be able to discover semantic links or networks, relations between words and ideas that I, through the processes of what Franco Moretti called close reading, would not be able to discover myself. Kaiho Seiryō is a very prominent figure of intellectual history, often classified as a thinker, a philosopher, someone active in the field of political economy, and often called a pioneer of Japanese modernity. Despite long-standing unease due to his burlesque style of writing and his eccentric ideas, which go back to the 1930s and which shine forth from this marvelous quote from a book by Luke Roberts, there is an ongoing belief in the identity of Kaiho Seiryō as a thinker, Shisoka, which leads up to the latest publications touching on him, like, for example, Yoshida Toshizumi's publication on the history of intellectual economic thought in the Edo period. Yoshida does not allow for any kind of interpretation of Kaiho Seiryō except that of a thinker or philosopher, whereas there is a second line in literature on Kaiho Seiryō which sees him as a bunjin, a literati in the first stage of his life, who through his extensive travels through central Japan in the later stages of his life turned into a political thinker. For a number of years now, I have been very much in doubt if this idea of classifying Kaiho Seiryō, and for that not only Kaiho Seiryō, but in the end any kind of Shisoka of the Edo period, as a thinker, or if we do not have to find other categories of how to come to grips with Edo period intellectual personalities. In a recent article, I drew attention to all the many pieces of writings, of poems, and even of pictures which Kaiho Seiryō painted throughout his life, which did not enter the Kaiho Seiryō Zenshu and which did not leave any traces in research on Kaiho Seidio. What in the end I would like to do is to show that Kaiho Seidio was more than a thinker, that he was someone engaged in a number of discussions and discourses of his times, someone who was aware of how his contemporaries thought, how they imagined their world, and who played with the preconceptions of the people around him, who manipulated the preconceptions of his contemporaries, both in his writings and in the lectures he gave throughout his life. In the end, for me, if I borrow Dominique Lacapra's expression from one of his publications, Kaiho Seidio stands for the cannibalization of literary traditions and of contemporary social reality, so to say. But how to prove this? My idea was that I could use the powers of digital humanities, especially in the field of text mining and topic modeling. And my first modest aim, which has not changed since 2017, is first of all to ascertain the technical feasibility of what I have in mind. In other words, to adapt text mining and topic modeling techniques in order to analyze Kaiho Seidio's works in the context of a broader rhetoric and semantic context. And with broader rhetoric and semantic context, I do not mean just a comparison of his writings to those of Ogyo Sodai or Dazai Shundai and other peoples in the field of Confucian political thought, but in the context of everything written during the age in which Kaiho Seidio lived, including letters, essays, scribblings by people of note and those of no note. In other words, I would have to overcome the great problem we all have to face, which Margaret Cohen called the Great Unread, and which went into Franco Moretti's idea of the slaughterhouse of literature. Unfortunately, the field of Japanese studies is not very compatible with such an idea, whereas scholars from the field of Chinese studies, like, for example, the authors of the two articles which I mentioned here, can draw on vast numbers of computerized Chinese texts in order to explore full text databases with the techniques of text mining and topic modelings and lay bare semantic networks running through these huge quantities of text. Nothing comparable is possible with regard to Japanese literature or the Japanese history of thought. So what now? I don't know how to overcome this conundrum at the moment, but I believe that it will be possible in the future, perhaps, to adopt techniques of text mining and to rely on models of vector space modeling in order to reveal semantic and syntactic relationships between words and the ideas behind words in huge quantities of Japanese text. Since at the moment we do not have access to the necessary text databases in order to proceed with such kinds of analysis, I used the help of RStudio and KH Coder in order to at least play around with a very small number of texts which I have prepared for computerized analysis. One example, for example, is Kaiho Seidio's text Shokuhodan, which I prepared for analysis in the context of RStudio. I don't know if you're familiar with the computer language R. I'm not a computer person, so I'm not familiar with programming and I have no ideas about computer languages, but fortunately there is this software called RStudio, which draws on the computer language R and which allows you to proceed with certain operations in the field of text analysis. You have a display field like this with 4 smaller windows. One of these, the one on the top left, allows you to enter the code for your operations, and in the end you will get your results in the bottom right side. What I would like to adopt to my kind of interest are the processes or the algorithms standing behind what is called word-to-vec, an analysis of texts which tries to get an idea how words are related to each other and what kind of semantic networks they constitute within a given text. Ideally, when you are successful with your operations, you will get plots like this with certain clusters of words which are written together and which suggest that there are closer semantic ties between them. This is an example of such a cluster which is rather faithful to my close reading of the Shokuhodan. The problem with these operations is that you have to invest a huge amount of time in order to prepare your texts. You can set out with such a text which has not been even edited in a printed edition, but in most cases you will use something which has been printed. You will make a scan, and after making a scan you will face all the many mistakes the scanning software left in your text and which you have to correct by yourself. Afterwards you will have to make a new version which leaves out the so-called stop words, and in order to make the text readable for RStudio you will have to insert spaces between the semantic units of your text. Afterwards you will be able to proceed with your processing, and if you use a little bit more text, not only one of Kaigo text but a number of them, you will get larger word clouds like these, and you can start looking for certain clusters. What I noticed was that however I adopted the processes of my analysis, the results were more or less the same, and the word clusters, the more specialized, interesting word clusters which I found, do not differ much from one operation to the next, which might suggest which not only might suggest, but which suggests that the basis for these operations, in my case, is much too small. In order to arrive at more meaningful operations and results, you would have to use much larger quantities of text. Another alternative to RStudio would be using the so-called KH coder, which incidentally is based on R and the operations possible with RStudio. You would need an Excel file with the text you would like to analyze, like for example in this example, text in small lines, and you would have to add volume numbers and paragraph numbers in order to use all the facilities available for the KH coder. And you ideally would prepare another small file, the themes file, which you can insert in the operations, the analysis process organized by KH coder in order to get certain readings from the texts you would like to analyze. Much of what the KH coder does is very similar to what you can do with RStudio. as well. But if you use the operation which relies on the themes file which you have prepared in advance, you can do some things which I found very insightful when I tried them out over the last weeks. I prepared a file with 3 subjects, Ju standing for Jugaku, Bushi, and what I call Parody, and used the KH coder to analyze the text of Kaiho Seiryu's major work, the Keikodan, and the results look like this. If you compare the results for the 3 subjects, Jugaku, Bushi, and what I call Parody, you will notice that in certain parts of the Keikodan there is a heavy reliance on subjects related to Confucianism. In other parts of the Keikodan you will find a focus on things related to Bushi and their financial distress situation. And you will also notice that throughout the whole of the Keikodan, you can find words which I classified under the rubric of parody, exaggerating works like tonto or ittai, ikkoni, and so on, which run through the whole text and which for me are an example of parody as a basso continuo running through the Keikodan and probably through other texts of Kaiho Seiryu, which for me indicate that there is a strong reliance or a strong focus on what La Capra called the carnivalization of a literary tradition, which can be read also from Kaiho Seiryu texts, if I am not mistaken. But this is something which I have to investigate in more detail, and I hope over the next years with more knowledge about what I really am trying to do. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michael. Christian from the Nomad IT team told me that we do not have to worry too much about the time limit on our special event, because there's nothing following on this same Zoom channel. But still, I would like to go on so we have a bit more time maybe in the Q&A later. So next will be Uesaka Sensei.
Okay. Oh my. Okay, I need to. Oh, maybe it's working. Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all coming to my presentation today. My name is Ayaka Uesaka, and I am in the Center for Mathematical Modeling and Data Science, Osaka University. My presentation title today is Early Modern Japanese Literature from a Quantitative Perspective. To introduce myself, I indicated the project I have participated in so far. This project, Tamer text analysis, it's become the dark blue, digital humanities, survey analysis, and statistical education. From here, in my today's presentation, I focus on the quantitative aspect of early modern literature, especially the novels of Saika Hara. There are 4 things I'd like to cover today's presentation. Firstly, I will talk about the background and prior research. Secondly, I will explain database using this research. Then I will explain Saikaku's authorship attribution problem with quantitative approach. Finally, I will describe the content of Saikaku Gyozoshi by LDA topic modeling. I'd like to start by looking at some background. I'm concerned here with the novels of Saikaku. He is a fiction writer and haikai poet. He is one of the most popular writers of the 17th century Genroku period in Japan. His novels are known for their significance for developing today's Japanese contemporary novels. It's said that he wrote 24 novels in 10 years, but that has not been 100% verified. The reason is a lack of records about him and his novels. Saikak's researchers tried to identify which is Saikak's work. They looked into the book's history, their contents, and handwriting. And however, some problems still remain. Questions remain as to which novel were really written by Saikaku, especially the posthumous novels published by his student. After Saikak's death, his posthumous novels were edited and published from 1693 to 1699 by Dansui Hojo. Dansui is Saikak's student. He is also a fiction writer and haikai poet. As a result, they are suspicious that his posthumous novels are suspicious that Dansui may have modified Saikak's work. Many Saikak's researchers have raised questions about the authorship of Saikak's posthumous work. A quantitative approach has become a powerful tool for textual scholarship. That method has made it possible to provide new insight into the authorship problem of Saikak's novel. And I will explain about database using this research. To resolve Saikak's authorship problem, we made a digital text and database of Saikak's. Since Japanese sentences are not separated by space, we built a rule with Saikak's researcher and spaces between the words in all of the sentences. The grammatical categories information were added and processing of word form changed. I show the right table, and it shows a part of the database from Saikak's novel. All sentences are divided into words, and the information was added as required for the analysis. Moreover, not just this one, to compare Saikak's work, we asked Saikak and Dansui's researcher to develop Saikak's student Dansui's database. We use the same rule to build the database, and we make the data also the Dansui's work. But that is just 3, but for comparing to Saikak's work. At first, we need to know Saikak and Dansui's writing style are same or different. This is a list. I show the list on here. They are novels using the analysis. Saikak's novels is I used to the full work in this analysis, and Dansui's novels is become the 3 to the analysis. We used 4 early Saikak's novels and 3 Dansui's novels. Because these novels are considered unlikely to have been created by other artists, many researchers think about this is their work, Saikak and Dansui. So I decided to use these novels to compare their writing style. We examine these. I show there are 12 variables in here, and since the length of each work is different, so in the analysis we use the appearance rate of these variables. Okay, at first we compared Saikak's to Dansui's novel, using trial variables like a grammatical category, a Japanese particle, noun, verbs, or top words, or like that. That we conducted PCA analysis and cluster analysis among Saikak and Dansui's novels. PCA and cluster analysis are unsupervised classification method. PCA is a method to summarize many dimensions into fewer. Cluster analysis is classify objects by collecting similarities among groups to form clusters. The left graph are one of the results of PCA and cluster analysis. This result revealed that Saikak and Dansui's novel differ in top 50 words. We got a similar result in the other 9 variables. Also, we conducting the bagging, random forest, and adboost. These are methods for supervised classification. It's called ensemble learning. Ensemble learning is a method in which classifier with low accuracy, that means that weak classifier are integrated using machine learning method to increase accuracy and create a strong classifier. The right table, it shows in this PowerPoint the result of these ensemble learning results. In here, it's become a small one, but the Saikak and Dansuis are classified in many variables, like the most, it's become Japanese, but the Joshi is a Japanese particle, the F1 value become the 98%. So the meaning is it's this variable can see the differences between the Saikak and Dansui. The meaning is they can classify. Okay, and this result indicated that from the PCA unsupervised method and supervised method indicated that Saikak and Dansui's writing style are different. So based on these results, we analyzed Saikak's 4 post-humorous work. Analysis of post-humorous novels using variables that shows differences in the text of the early Saikak's novels and Dansui's novels. These results show many parts of the Saikak's post-humorous novel show characteristic more similar to Saikak than to Dansui. I just one example on the left hand. That is the result of the PCA and cluster analysis. And the right one is the ensemble learning method. Now, since many volume and chapter of the posthumous collection show similar characteristics to the Saikaku, it is possible that many of these were written by Saikaku and the Dansui's editing to a limited extent. As a result, the main author of the posthumous novels are Saikaku. Okay, next I will explain about the content analysis. I examine the content of 24 gyozoshi quantitatively by using LDA topic modeling. Topic model with LDA is a probabilistic modeling for text mining to identify topics which have a meaningful structure within collection of documents. To examine the content of Saikak's novel, I use the noun, verb, and adjective. In general, Saikak's novel can be divided into 4 categories. The Koshokumono, that is a romance story. The Bukemono is samurai story. Shonimono, merchant story. And Zatsumono is narrative story. Even though there are several ways of classification of these 4 categories. So I adapted Munemasa's classification. He said in the article that is the common classification way of these categories in this study when mapping the result of topic modeling. This is the result of the topic modeling. The left table shows the top 25 probable words in each topic. As a result, LDA topic modeling, I observed the topics consisting of the words related to the romance. It looks like romance, samurai story, merchant story, and narrative stories. In addition, the results show that the findings of topic modeling were similar to Munemasa's classification. That is, I put the graphs in the right hand. At first, I want to explain about the table of the left one. So the topic 1 consisted of the words related to samurai story, such as the solo, that is the words, polite expression, polite words of the be, aru, or iro, like that. And the utsu, it's the next word. Utsu is a bench. The topic 2 consider of the words related to the merchant story, such as the toru is take or accept, and the kane is about the money. The next one is ie is a house, or like that. So we can expect that is the words for the samurai story and the merchant story of each topics. The right figures show density of topic related to term in each topics. As I expected, density 1 topic related to samurai story and higher in the novel of samurai story. In addition, the density of the topic 2, that is the right hand, the chonimono, I put these graphs. Topic 2 related to the merchant story as higher in the novels of merchant story. That one, it's become high. Furthermore, topic propagation changes as a function of chapter of Koushoku Ichida Otoko. The horizon axis show the order of Koushoku Ichida Otoko from left to right, starting from the chapter 1 of the volume 1, with the later half of the story on the right. The vertical axis show the probability of appearance of each topics. These results suggest that topic modeling is the effective way to classify quantitatively the content of the Saikaku Yozoshi. Okay, we are coming to the end of today's presentation. I'm now going to give a brief summary of what we have covered. I provide the answer to the authorship problem of the Saikaku Yozoshi by text mining approach. A quantitative approach, quantitative analysis of the questionable post-humorous novels suggests that the most of the part were written by Saikaku. The main author is Saikaku. The answer is just editing. Moreover, the LDA topic modeling for the Saikaku Yozoshi can capture the latest topics related to each content. So the inclusion, this quantitative approach with text mining is effective to examine the content of early modern Japanese literature. Okay, thank you once again for taking the time to join today's presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we will have some questions on your presentation later. I do have some questions, but for now we will continue with Hashimoto-sensei.
you for Kitoman-san for your kind introduction. And thank you for organizing this wonderful panel. Well, hi everyone. My name is Yuta Hashimoto. I'm from Rekihaku, or the National Museum of Japanese History in Sakura. My presentation title today is Can Crowdsourcing Boost Data-Driven Research in Pre-Modern Japanese History? And I'm going to discuss the potential of crowdsourcing as a way to facilitate data-driven research in the field of pre-modern Japanese history. And as an example of such crowdsourcing, I'm going to introduce Minna de Honkoku, a crowdsourcing platform designed for large-scale transcription of historical Japanese documents. So let's get started. Well, it has been nearly 2 decades since the term digital humanities was coined, and it's increasingly common in humanities research to use computers to process large amounts of data. In the field of Japanese studies, scholars like Kinski Sensei and Uesaka-san have been working on this type of data-driven research for years. Well, data-driven methods for humanities research include text mining, data visualization, social network analysis, machine learning, and so on. My talk is not about these particular methods, but about the infrastructure behind these methods, that is text. Well, my point is that most of these methods require large-scale text databases or datasets, but it's not always possible to find such a textual database or dataset, especially in the field of pre-modern Japanese studies. I think this situation makes it more or less difficult to conduct data-driven research in this field. Of course, there are a number of resources available online that can be used as data sources for data-driven research, including the full text database of medieval Japanese documents run by the Historiographical Institute in the University of Tokyo, or Tokyo Daigaku Shirohen Sanjo. There is also Nihon Kotenseki dataset published a few years ago by the National Institute of Japanese Literature, or Kokubunken. For linguist studies, Ninja or Kokugokken provides the corpus of historical Japanese texts. And there are also a number of published compilations of historical documents and literary works, although you need to digitize them first in order to get digital texts from these printed works. Well, on the other hand, the number of documents whose transcription texts are available is quite small compared to the number of documents whose digital images are available. For instance, the National Diet Library of Japan provides the digital images of 100,000 pre-modern documents online. Likewise, digital images of more than 150,000 pre-modern works were available on the database of pre-modern Japanese works run by Kokubunken. This makes it quite important for the future of pre-modern Japanese studies to transcribe digital images of historical documents. And this is where crowdsourcing comes into play. Our platform, Minna de Honkoku, is a crowdsourcing platform designed for large-scale transcription of historical Japanese documents. Transcription texts created by volunteers on Minna de Honkoku are made freely available under the Creative Commons license, so that anyone can use these texts for any purposes. Well, Minna de Honkoku was a project started by the Historical Earthquake Study Group, or HESG, at Kyoto University in 2017, and it later became a collaborative project among HESG, the University of Tokyo, and the National Museum of Japanese History. The initial version of Minna de Honkoku was meant to transcribe historical earthquake records stored in the University of Tokyo But the current version targets not only historical aspect records, but also general kinds of historical documents, such as Buddhist sutras, public or private diaries, and illustrated novels that were popular in the Edo period. The current version of Minna de Honkoku has been running for 2 years since its launch in 2019. And this is what has been achieved on our platform since then. So far, more than 1,700 people have registered user accounts on our platform, and they have finished transcribing more than 1,000 documents out of 2,000 available on our platform. Total number of characters transcribed so far has reached at 11 million, and this number keeps increasing at the pace of by 20,000 characters every day. As for the quality control, our method is quite similar to that of Wikipedia. I mean, we don't hire experts to check the transcriptions. We just leave it to the cross-checking among volunteers. Even so, the accuracy of the transcription is 98.5%, which is not perfect, of course, but good enough for most purposes, including quantitative analysis of texts. Well, from now on, I'd like to demonstrate how you can access the transcribed text on Minna de Honkoku. Please visit our website and you can browse the list of the transcription projects currently ongoing on our platform from the navigation menu on the top, up here. Like this. Currently, we have 18 transcription projects, and the number of projects is steadily increasing. Some of the projects are the results of collaboration with public libraries and archives, and other projects are created by individual scholars of Japanese studies. And each project covers a different genre of historical documents. For instance, this one left top is devoted to Buddhist sutras, and this one down here is for Japan-related materials available on Gallica, which is the digital library of the French National Library. And this one on the right bottom corner deals with books on medicine and healthcare published in the Edo period. So let's take a look at the contents of this project. Well, each project contains dozens to hundreds of documents to transcribe, and you can browse the list of documents that belong to each project like this. You see the red stamps on the thumbnails of some documents. These read Honkoku Kanryō and indicate that the transcription of this document is completed. And most of the documents in this project are imported from the National Diet Library of Japan. But this one is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So let's take a look inside this document. This is the transcription page of this document. On the left side of its digital image, its transcription text is displayed like this. From the navigation menu on the top, you can move back and forth through the pages of the document. The other information like revision history of the transcription and bibliographic metadata of the document are also available from these tabs on the top. Well, not only you can browse the transcription text, but also you can download it in various formats from the DL tab. That means download. The available formats include plain text, HTML, XML, Microsoft Word, and LaTeX. And this is how XML output looks like. And also, and this is docx output. Note that text has furigana next to them. Well, and Minna de Honkoku also provides programmatic interfaces that you can use in your programs or on your terminal. One is JSON-based API from which you can get transcription text and their metadata in a machine-readable format. If you have some experience in programming languages like JavaScript or Python, this API should be quite easy to work with. We also have a GitHub repo that compiles all the transcription text on Minna de Honkoku in plain text format. This repo should be useful when you deal with our transcription text as a single dataset. Okay, from now on, I'd like to briefly examine how you can conduct data-driven research using these transcription text on Minna de Honkoku. Well, one possible way is to use some text mining software to apply text analysis methods on the transcription text. There are a couple of candidates for this, but I recommend EAJS2021 among them. Of course, you can use our language, like as Dr. Kinski suggested. Basically, you can do what EAJS2021 can do using our language. I just recommended EAJS2021 because it is probably the most popular software for text analysis among Japanese academia, and it has a good support for Japanese texts. EAJS2021 itself is designed for modern Japanese text, but it can deal with pre-modern Japanese text as well by combining it with Unidic, which is electronic dictionary for historical Japanese text, developed by Ninja or Kokugoken. As an experiment, I downloaded from Minna de Honkoku the transcription text of Hashikagigen, a work by Shikite Samba in 1803, and tried a few basic text analysis methods on these texts, including word frequency and co-occurrence network. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything interesting through this process because I just picked up this work randomly without any intention. However, if you use EAJS2021 or RStudio to analyze the text with more advanced methods for a specific purpose, it should be possible to extract useful historical or literary insights from them. Another direction of using the transcription text may be information extraction from historical documents. Well, some of the projects on Minna de Honkoku deal with very large historical collections. For instance, there is a project that aims to transcribe Otakashi diary, which is a family diary kept by the Otakashi family in Ibaraki from 1852 to 1868. There's one thing special about this diary, that is, it has detailed records of daily weather and temperature, which is quite unusual for a diary at this time. In fact, some climate scientists believe that this diary can be useful for understanding the weather condition of this period. Well, because the transcription project has, because this transcription project has completed a few months ago, the entire digital text of this diary is available. However, it will be very time consuming if we manually extract the necessary information from the text, because the diary has more than 3,400 pages. So it's obvious that we need to use some kind of natural language processing technology here. And for now, we stopped here, and we are looking for the technology to achieve our goal. But if we achieve this goal with some technology, the result may give us some insight about the climate change that we face today. And we'll be able to apply the same procedure to the other historical corrections on Minna de Hongkoku. Okay, that's the last slide. In this talk, I introduced only briefly a cloud sourcing platform, Minna de Hongkoku. I have demonstrated how to obtain transcribed text from our platform in both human readable and machine readable formats. And I have presented a few ideas for using these texts for data-driven research. And the developers of Minna de Hongkoku, including myself, are very willing to help scholars use our data for their research. And we think that's one of our missions. So please contact us if you are interested in research in this direction. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. As always, it was a pleasure hearing and seeing about Minna de Hongkoku. We already do have some questions in the chat, so I propose that we start the Q&A in a second. But first, because we do not have a very strict time limit, I wanted to give Leo a chance to conclude his presentation for 5 more minutes, if that's okay for everyone.
Sorry for the inconvenience, but thank you, Bastian. It will not take that long. It is just one point that is worth mentioning, which kind of is similar to what Hashimoto-sensei just presented. There is now a JSON API for the JBDB as well. It is shown here. I will put the links in the chat as well. So this is for anyone to just freely explore the JBDB in a programmatic way as well. So if you know JavaScript or any programming language where you can make REST requests, then have a go at it. Just to briefly conclude that the point of that is first and foremost that now linking to the JBDB becomes possible as well. As we've seen before, we can link from the JBDB to other projects. We have projects within the JBDB, but now if you have any other projects that might be interested in linking to the JBDB, this is now possible as well. Although I should mention that the documentation of the API is still work in progress. Which leads me to my brief conclusion as well. That is one of the most important parts that has to be done in the upcoming month. Finishing that documentation, finishing the user manual that is associated with web application, and then thinking about how we could proceed with integrating other projects. So one point which was brilliantly demonstrated by Hashimoto-sensei right now is crowdsourcing data as a way to somewhat automatically enhance the database. Another point is inviting scholars to contribute project-specific data. What we could envision with that in the long run is being able to take a graph as this, which shows the current whole network for the JBDB and be able to dissect it in a more project-oriented way or research question-driven way. Because as of now, all you see is basically every person in the JBDB and their connections, but without real knowledge as to why these clusters exist and where they come from. Incidentally, these clusters that you see here are, apart from our central one centered around EAJS2021, those that were generated by students in a seminar at Sofia University in 2018, where they did add project-specific data, but at the time we didn't have the database notion of projects yet. So unfortunately, we cannot show really who the people in this cluster are without having to recourse on having to look at each person and saying, okay, this person comes from this and this project. It would have been much easier now if we had the project capability back then, so that we could show, okay, this is the Korean immigrants in Japan project, for example. This is the Hartmann project up there, and so on and so forth. So that is something we strive towards in the future, to provide other scholars with a more detailed overview of the JBDB data. And that was basically it. Thank you very much, Bastian, for the added opportunity to talk about that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to what will become of the JBDB after additional projects have been added. Okay, so now we have the opportunity to ask questions to the speakers. I would propose to post your questions in the chat of this Zoom session, and because we suffered some issues with somebody's microphone, there has been some feedback. I think it might be best that you just write down your questions in the chat, and then each speaker has the opportunity to answer your questions separately. Okay, and I think there have been a question already by James Morris. Thank you. And I think this was a question to Hashimoto Sensei, and about the accuracy of the transcriptions in Minori Honkoku.
Okay. Shall I answer now? Okay. Thank you for your question, Morris-san. Yeah. Actually, the accuracy was just an estimation. We did from the survey. I mean, I asked 2 scholars with PhD in Japanese history to review 100,000 characters from transcription text, and asked them count the errors included in these texts. So based on the number of errors found in this process, we made an estimation that the accuracy of transcription text was 98.5%. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, are there any more questions? I think today was quite a spectrum that we covered in this session. Okay, no further questions. Oh yeah, Harald Kümmerle has a question. Okay.
Can I ask it like that? It's perhaps
Yeah,
a bit
sure.
faster. It's mainly for Ayaka, I think, regarding the stability of topic modeling. I use it myself. I often run the generation process several times with the same parameters and then focus on the stable topics only, or make an argument why the non-stable things should not be taken into account. How do you go about regarding this? I think it's interesting to Michael Kinski too, but you're more on the technical side, I think. So I ask you.
That you asking about which part? The topic modelings?
Yes, in general, there is randomization going on. And yeah, so, but repeating shows the stable parts, and you can identify the essential parts, like this was, for example. And there are variations which are just noise, so to say. So how do you go about that in your arguments?
Okay. When I do that is the question is connecting to the how many topics we need to decide to do the topic modeling. Is that correct?
I know that in general, it depends on how fine you want to identify the aspects, but no matter how many topics or how few topics, there is randomization in the process normally. And there are stable aspects in the result, and there are non-stable aspects. And how do you treat this partial instability?まあ、安定性、日本語で質問させていただきたいと思いますけど、その安定性、トピックの安定性についてどう説明していますか？なんか一部分だけに注視することを弁明していますか？
トピックを決めるときの話ですよね。安定性っていうのは
結果を見て、それを取って、データドリブンの
これやる前に分析を別でやっていて、何個のトピックでやればいいかっていうのをそれを見て、いくつか指標がある、すいません、なんか日本語でいくつか指標があるんですけど、その指標を見て一応トピック数を決めて、今トピックモデリング示しているデータはやってるんですね、分析自体は。で、私の今示している結果はどこかそのトピック50個とか作って何かこう取ってきて示しているのではなくて、一応その指標とこのテキストの特徴っていうものを見てトピック数を決めてトピックを決めているので、どこかその一部の特徴っていうかデータを持ってきてこう 説明するという方法は取ってないんですね。そういった方法でやってる方もいらっしゃると思うんですけど、今この方法ではそういった方法は取ってないです。
はい。
すいません。
Okay, are there any more questions? I think topic modeling is a very very difficult topic, so to say. There was an article from 2018 by Gerlach et al. And they were proposing a different approach than LDA for topic modeling because of the question that Harold just posed, the question of how do you decide on how many topics you're using in the topic model. And I think they have a network-based approach. Okay. If there are no more questions, the second part will start in about half an hour, 35 minutes. At the end, I just want to refer you to our own project, the Digitale Japanologie in Frankfurt. And if you have any questions or later questions about today's presentation, please feel free to contact me, and I will try to answer your questions or connect you to one of our speakers. And thank you very much for your attendance and for listening to our session. And I hope I'll see all of you in half an hour.